Welcome to the C Word, the Conservators podcast. You're listening to a special bonus episode of the C Word, featuring the audio from the Diversity panel, which did as part of ICON's annual meeting in November 2018. Please bear in mind that this is a live recording using a multitude of microphones in a slightly unpredictable environment, so the audio is a little bit dodgy from time to time. Without further ado, let's get to it. Well, you know me, Kloe and Christina already, but let's listen to Alison Richmond introducing our co-hosts on the panel.
And I would now like to introduce Rebecca Plumbe. Rebecca is an emerging professional, currently not employed in conservation, very sadly. She is on a gap at the moment, but she has experience in conservation working for National Trust and Oxfordshire County Council. Nerys Rudder, last but not least, Nerys is a British Barbadian collections manager and conservator working currently at Autograph. Autograph is a photographic arts charity that focuses on social justice, diversity, and human rights. So, without more ado, I am going to hand over to the panel.
Oh, thanks very much, Alison. That's awesome. So welcome everyone to our really special edition of the C Word, the Conservators podcast. We've never been live before, so hi guys.
Hi.
Normally we sit in a little room where nobody sees us, so this is terrifying, but it's going to be fine, and we're really pleased to be here. I thought we might begin by starting to talk about what diversity is. So, for example, I remember that I did a little illustration for our first ever episode on demographics, which was the UK Conservators as 100 people. And it was based on data from 2012 to 2013. And obviously that's not an accurate snapshot of who we are today, because we have changed a little. But back in those days, it was 65 women and 35 men, if we boiled down the profession in the UK to 100 people. 97 were white, and 2 were disabled. So that's the kind of playing field we have when we start talking about diversity in our profession. We could really do with stirring up the pot a little bit, I think. And today we're here to talk about what we might be able to do and what the playing field looks like today. Who'd like to go next?
I have a feeling Christina has some statistics. Have you got some up to date?
Well, actually, oh, did I just ruin all of your statistics? No.
I normally get nominated as the kind of stato for all of the podcasts because I've got an endless appetite for statistics. I suppose so on the train down here, I was trying to find as many demographic statistics about the conservation profession as I could. And as well as the report that Jenny cites, which was actually the Conservation Labour Market Intelligence report that was commissioned by ICON and presented at the 2013 Triennial Conference. And just as an aside, at the presentation, Kenneth, the author of the report, said that the average conservator was a white woman in her 40s with a graduate with at least 1 degree. And everybody promptly looked around the room, which was full of middle-aged white women. We kind of thought, yeah, this is fairly true. That has changed a bit. Until the mid-80s, conservation was actually had more men than women in it. So it's not always been the female-dominated profession that we think it is today. And it's also changed quite a lot from being a profession where only 24% were graduates in 1973 to one in which, sorry, I'm just leafing through my notes here, one in which 78% had at least an undergraduate degree in 2013. So again, we're becoming more female, we're becoming higher educated. The needle's not really moved at all in terms of diversity of ethnicity and so on, but it hasn't always been the way it is, and there's no reason why it should inevitably always be the way it is either. I think was the gist of that, really.
Great.
Anyone else want to?
Well, so I didn't really prepare very much for this. I've done Savour broadcast with the guys before, thoroughly enjoyed it. Felt a little bit better because it was going to be edited, so this live is a little bit scary, so excuse me. So we are imagining you all slightly drunk, not naked. But finding out that Christina has mixed heritage as well, we're going to share here.
Yep.
So I was a bit surprised because I thought I was going to be the only BAME, Black Asian minority ethnic person here. And I do believe that I am the only BAME disabled conservator here or within our confines. I'm slightly different because I am Barbadian and British, and dual national. So I come from, and I also come from a class system where I know that I belong in certain spaces. And this is what is going to come, this is basically the crux of what I want to tell you guys. There's been 200 years of indoctrination of you guys and us guys being told that only certain people belong in certain spaces. So what you are endeavoring to do now, thank you for jumping on the bandwagon, it is very important, is looking to break down 200 years of indoctrination. And the most important thing is to create spaces where people feel like they belong, that they can walk into a space and say, I can become a museum professional, I can become a conservator, I can do these things. Right now, they can't because you have no presence. We as conservators have no presence in the communities that you are trying to reach. And it's very, very sad, especially here in London, which is one of the most diverse capitals in the world. So I'm actually pretty shocked at statistics myself because it's much less than I thought it was going to be. But
excuse me, what is the Asian statistic?
Sorry, I'll have to ask the statistician.
So in 2013, 1% of conservators identified as Asian or British Asian of some sort.
So it's higher.
Not in conservation. I mean, on that subject, 13% of the UK population is from a background that is not white British, so from various other minorities. And so 13% for the UK workforce as a whole, 7% in the museum sector, and only 3% in conservation. So not only is the museum sector less diverse ethnically than the UK workforce as a whole, but conservation is even less so than museums, I think.
Then I must have banned the entire consent as they for their CPD. That's a CPD you've done. I definitely thought it was fun.
That's right. I can't hear it, brother. I also do people locally back on there. Is it possible to have a roving guide, maybe as we're not filling the room, perhaps you could move forward a bit and we go to a conversation?
Please that would be nice.
We
Please
don't
do.
mind.
There's lots of empty space up here, right next to me.
Oh, lovely.
Thanks, Deborah.
As we're waiting to do that, I'm going to throw out a challenge to you, to ICON, and also to all the institutions that you guys represent, because you are represented, because most of you work with, I would assume most of you either work in private practice or with an institution, and quite frankly, it's not going to work if we focus on tokenism. It's not going to work if you're just looking for an easy or a simple method of getting a couple of people in so that your numbers can be raised up. What I'm asking you, and what I'm challenging you to do, is to actually think about how you can change the institution so that the not just BAME, but disabled communities, all of the underrepresented communities can be not only comfortable in your institutions, but also see themselves represented. Because at the end of the day, when you're walking around and everybody looks like you're going to feel like you can be in a space. But when you walk around and no one looks like you're going to feel separated. So it's a very personal, honestly, it's a very personal thing for me. But I will segue to a conversation I was having with Christina. It's not just about ethnicity, it is also about class.
So just to butt in, I mean, something that, and not to put the pressure on the people who actually, I suppose, do tick these diversity boxes, but maybe there's a certain responsibility on us to actually come out and say, we are disabled, we are part of the LGBT community, I am both of those things, and I'm not always advocating it, but it doesn't mean that we don't exist. So maybe for example, people like me to say, you are welcome, you already exist in the profession, and this is not as scary an environment as it might seem. Obviously, that's a very different thing with things like ethnicity, but maybe some voices just need to be louder and say that we already exist here, and this is a safe environment to work in, because it is.
I think one of the difficult things is the relatively small size of the profession. So it's hard to make those networks. It can be hard to find other people like you if you're the only person ticking a particular box, if you like, in your region, or possibly the only conservator in your museum. Conservation is a profession where it's hard to make those networks anyway, so I wonder if we should be trying to make those more visible as well. So I think so.
I would like to highlight that there's a really nice movement in the museum sector in general, of which we are very much a part. For example, there's Museum as Muck, which is a working class group that has started on Facebook, which I really recommend that you check out. There's also Museum Pride, which was very active this year for the LGBT community working within museums. So there are some really good movements out there.
There's Museum Detox.
Yes,
as well,
which is really, really, really good. And those are all vital to, it's vital that we as conservators join in those movements as well, because it might be the pool is small here, but there is a slightly bigger pool in the museum sector, and we can work on expanding it.
And I find it strange that in conservation it is so diverse, and yet we don't have that within the group of people that do the work. In my MA course, I was lucky enough to work alongside a whole variety of people from different cultures, different countries, and I found that thinking about how I treat objects kind of reflects in who I interact with, the conversations I was having, because they trained in different countries, because they bring different skill sets. It really, really enriched my experience. And I was all the more kind of grateful for it. So I'm shocked. I didn't know those statistics. I'm actually shocked to hear that it's not reflected in practice. And I think we should do what we can to try and change that. I really do. And I think it's got to have longevity. It's not something that can be, tick the box, we've got diversity. It's not like that, like you were saying, it's very personal. It needs to be taken seriously. So I can only sort of shout about how important that is, really. And I'm glad that we're talking about it, because I think it strikes chords with people.
Do you have some more intriguing statistics to share with us? No pressure, it's fine.
I came across an interesting one, which was that managers are less likely to have higher degrees than conservators as a whole, but I suspect that's a function of age and the fact that managers will by and large be older and have entered the profession at a time when higher degrees weren't necessary. One thing I did find is that in the Labour Market Intelligence Report, it said that the age group that had the highest rate of undergraduate or graduate degree training was actually people in their 30s, and it was lower for people who were older, who possibly entered the profession through other routes. But it was also lower for people who are younger. And I suspect that's because that's where we're starting to see ICON's efforts with alternative routes of entry to the profession kicking in. So that actually the people who were in their 30s in 2013, that's possibly the kind of high watermark of expecting Conservators to be largely a graduate or a postgraduate profession. And we are starting to see more people coming into the profession through other routes like apprenticeships and on-the-job training and that kind of thing. I do wonder whether what we're going to see further down the road is a sort of glass ceiling there, where those people are going to find that actually you can progress. It's all very well entering the profession, but you've also got to ensure that your career is sustainable in the longer term. And so I suppose that's a secondary point, is that it's not just about getting people to enter the profession in the first place or to go onto the training courses, but these people need to be able to find jobs. They need to find jobs that enable them to have a sustainable career, to support themselves on a reasonable salary, possibly to support a family, and to continue to find work for many years to come. And that's not always possible. And I think at the moment there are some, what you might call structural inequalities that make it more difficult for some people than for others to do that. And so I think that's possibly what we ought to be looking at.
Yeah, we were having a conversation with a group of people my age. I'm 24, and we all entered conservation not really knowing the outcome of what career we decided to go into. And I think possibly there needs to be more honesty about prospects, because it is scary, I won't lie, it is scary looking at how the job market lies now. Contracts are short term, you end up travelling a lot. If you don't have the support of your family, it's very, very difficult to even do things like get experience through volunteering, because real life kicks in, you have to pay your rent. And I think if we could find a way of alleviating some of that pressure, some of that kind of just the sheer sort of scary nature of it, I think it would be a lot less negative when you do look at the reality of what you're trying to enter. Because I think in reality you do need the experience, the real world experience, and we're very passionate about trying to get that, but it's not always possible in our shoes, because we have to put earning money first, because we can't just go off and do these things. We know about the internship opportunities, but they're highly competitive. And I know that you do fantastic work through those programs, but I think there's room for more scope with whether a separate funding can be gathered for people who are trying to enter, who don't have support networks already in place through family. They're very much on their own. I think that's a good way of opening it up. And I don't know if anyone agrees. But
I was going to say, just for employers as well, just things like being willing to offer travel expenses to people who come to job interviews, and factoring that in when you're considering the cost of recruitment. It's a relatively small cost added to the cost of employing somebody, but for somebody who's looking for a job and doesn't currently have a job and has no income, that can make the difference between being able to go to the job interview and not being able to go to it. And as an employer, obviously it's in your interests to make sure that you are able to attract the widest pool of candidates possible.
And that is a reality. I know people who haven't gone to job interviews because they just can't afford to spend the night away, because it's a lot of money. It's over £100 usually. And sometimes companies don't offer that reimbursement, so you really have to think about that. And it shouldn't be like that, because if they've offered you an interview, they obviously want to meet you. It shouldn't be a monetary barrier, but there is. And some companies are great, they reimburse the whole thing, but it's an area which does have an effect. People do lose out because they're not able to afford these things.
I wondered if does anyone have any questions in the room now? I'm interested particularly in an opinion of...
How does conservation compare to other professions that are largely postgraduate?
If I may,
yeah.
I don't have statistics like Christina does, but I remember when I was also in Cardiff that conservation was the second to last paid job, expecting the highest qualifications, with journalism being the only one that was below us. So we were at the very bottom with just journalists below us. Them journalists. So we were speaking about this earlier as well. The ICON minimum wage, salary scale, which, you know, the Americans are now saying, oh my goodness, what great work ICON has done. And I'm like, yeah, great, but it hasn't changed since I was at school. And so, you know, this is not, it may be a living wage, but it's certainly not a living wage with a couple of kids and having other responsibilities as well. When I look at my baby cousin, who's a lawyer, who's making twice as much as I am, when I'm looking at, you know, teachers who are making more than I am, and I've been doing what I've been doing for the past 15, 20 years, a deputy head at a school in London making about £43,000 a year. And compare that to what that's a deputy of a department, sorry, not a deputy head of a school, but deputy head of a department is making £43,000 a year. I think that's what...
But this is about salary levels, it's not about diversification.
But the salary levels directly impacts diversity. You're not going to get a diverse population coming into a profession where you cannot support your family, especially when you're talking about first and second generation immigrants. I don't like using those words, but basically you're talking about people who know that they are the backbone. They are the financial backbone of not just their nuclear family, but extended families. And they cannot look at a job that's offering 25 grand compared to a job that's offering 30 or 40 grand and choose conservation. So pay directly impacts who you get in through the door. You know, the work that ICON has done is fantastic, but we've got to have more of these conversations. We have to have more pushing back, saying, you know, you are expecting more and more from us. We need to be remunerated for it.
I also know that many people retrain and they enter conservation later in life. I know because I study with some people who had children, they had families, and they've gone back to their old jobs because it was impossible to support themselves. So what you say is true. And I always think, weirdly, conservation's kind of a young profession, but it's not, because short-term contracts and low salaries are suited to single people who can move around easily, and that doesn't translate to having kids.
Can I chip in here as the sort of token person with kids on the panel? And also, we with the C word, we recently did an episode about parenthood and about combining parenthood with a career in conservation. And obviously for most professions that wouldn't be a particularly exceptional thing to talk about. But we felt it was an interesting topic to talk about because we felt that actually there are real barriers to combining a career in conservation with having children. And I think I, particularly as a mid-career conservator, am actually finding that I'm struggling to sustain my career now more in a way that I didn't before, because I can no longer move around the country at the drop of a hat. I have to consider whether it's worth taking a 6-month contract somewhere else. I have to be able to plan for childcare. I need to know where I'm going to be working in a while. And I think these are all things that make it difficult for women in particular to sustain careers. I think most people feel happy when they've got through that first 10 years and sort of feel, okay, I've made it. But actually, there's no guarantee of that either. It can still continue to be difficult just because you've got children. One of the things we found, sort of talking about it, is that we felt we knew relatively few conservators with children, and we sort of did a bit of a straw poll. I certainly did in my organisation, where there were over 20 conservators in the sort of Federation of Museums that I work with. And I think it was less than 25% are parents. And I don't know which is hugely lower than the proportion in the population as a whole. And I don't know whether it's that people with children are leaving the profession, as you suggest, because they're just finding it's not sustainable, or whether conservation naturally attracts people who don't want children, or whether they find they're all kind of cared out and can't really deal with caring for small people as well after a day spent caring for objects. I'm not sure. But for whatever reason, that's also something I just wanted to throw in there, is that it can be about more kind of insidious things as well.
Shall we reference the, does anyone else have any questions or comments from the room, and then we can reference the Twitter that you're all watching. I can see you go. Yes. Do you want to take Christina's, because we can share? Does anyone have a question or comment?
So you're saying that we have to persuade people who use our services to change?
Yes. You will not get deficits. Okay, that's phrasing that.
That's a really, really, really big question.
Does it not work? I can tell you that there are a number of organisations that here within London that if you're talking about diversity and increasing your diversity,
let's use this one.
Any institution that is even questioning this should be speaking to the George Padmore Institute. There should be the George Padmore Institute. They should be talking to UCL. They should be talking to SOAS. Even the Black Cultural Archives, Autograph. There are a number of different institutions that have done decades of work on representation and identity, and have community, have a user, and a community respect that you should be speaking with. You're not reinventing the wheel. There's a bit of a question.
Sorry, you're saying the institutions, or we as Conservators?
You as Conservators as well, because you guys have to go and speak to your bosses and speak to your heads of department. And, this is not a passing it to someone else to deal with. It's everybody in this room should be doing something to try and make it a little bit more open and a little bit more accessible for those that find it hard. Because everyone in this room, including me, has incredible privilege to do what we do. Incredible privilege. But we get caught up in our own little dramas and don't see how much harder it is for somebody with children or somebody who's up north who can't afford the journey down for an interview, how hard they find it to get into this position. So yes, every single one of us.
Nerys, could you pass the only working mic?
Oh no, we've got that one there.
Oh, that's true, but we probably need that for people.
Okay, trouble. We have a roving mic now.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Check us out.
Should we have that one back then, and then we'll have it? Yeah. Sorry.
Shouldn't have done that. But on the right side, I won't give everyone up. Right, so I thought we would have a quick chat about the kind of questions that we've had on Facebook and Twitter already, ones that are coming in. I know that beforehand we did ask people to send us questions, and we've got a couple in the feed already. Mm-hmm. Jane wrote in and said, do you think requiring workplace experience before or during studying is positive, negative, or diversity neutral?
From my experience, we had to do a mandatory placement.
Oh, we're going to leave that one.
Sorry. Yep. My experience of placements was a largely positive one because it led to an internship. So I would say yes, do it if you can, but I realised that I was having a conversation with two museum professionals on Monday, and they say, we would love to offer placements to students. Universities write to us with their specific needs for a placement, but because of how much it's changed, because of the nature of the work that is being done now, it's not solely bench work. It's more sort of collections management in the widest possible sense. So you're dealing with things other than bench work. You need to know how to budget, you need to know how to project manage, work with volunteers. It's all part of conservation now. And I would say I think they were frustrated that they couldn't do more because they're constricted by what they have to do in their day job. They can't be more accommodating, but they'd love to. I know the course I studied on at the University of Lincoln, placements were mandatory when I did it, but they have changed that now, I believe. So it's optional. People can either do a placement or they can stay in the lab and do bench-based work. Part of that worries me because I think, from my perspective, I gained a lot of experience in the real world, and I speak from a position where the internship was paid and I could live at home. Not everyone can do that, so it's finding ways to make these opportunities more accessible, because otherwise you end up with people who can do it because the family is able to support them or they've already got savings.
This is a very genuine problem, because obviously internships and placements and work experience, they are wonderful things and they are really crucial in your development as an emerging professional. But I mean, even doing a couple of months in between semesters at university was backbreaking, right? And we actually got a small stipend towards it, and it still obliterated my savings. So that's not an option for a lot of people, and I think that means that any of these kind of unpaid or unsupported internships are actually really bad for diversity. Good for the people, bad for diversity. So I think that's something that we might just need to work on as a sector and really look at.
I think there's an expectation that you do get real world experience and you do expect to have to do it voluntary, and it's annoying because yes, it's fine to do it voluntary, but only for a short period of time. It's not sustainable. So I think that if anyone said, should you do a placement, I'd say yes, definitely. But it's not a question of you definitely should do it, it's can you do it? I think that's how we need to look at it and how we can make that easier. I don't know what anyone else thinks. I don't know how it's changed since you guys studied. Was it mandatory? Was it optional? Was it even a thing? I don't know.
Mandatory.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any comments to that in the room? Oh yes, please.
I'd just like to make a comment about a course that I'm involved with at arm's length, and it's the MPhil course, 2-year course in Glasgow, Centre for Textile Conservation. There's a cohort of 8 each year. This year's intake started in September. 8 students, postgraduate, 7 not from the UK, 1, as it happens, from India. I can't trot through all the others. In the second year, cohort of 8, I think 1, maybe 2 from the UK, 1 male, Singapore. There is diversity. The other thing too is that there are really generous bursaries that go with that particular course. I know this is just one course out of those in the UK, and I'm not promoting it, I'm just adding an insight that I have. There are placements, each student has one, and I would not be judging that individual affluence is necessarily a factor. So that's just one course. But,
well, that's very good to hear, thank you.
So I just want to make a comment about that. I'm glad to hear that, but I would have to say that it would be tempered by whether the students are international or national, because one of the issues that I have faced before is universities are actively seeking international students because they can make them pay so much more.
That's true.
During my time, a local student was paying £9,000 versus £16,000 for international per year. It was a science degree, but £16,000 is ridiculous. Again, I will have to own my privilege. The only reason I could study conservation is because I had scholarships. That is the only way I could do it. And so there is that, it has to be looked at the light of how much money is being brought in by these students. One of our local students said that if, we're going to say local, I mean one of our British students in our very small classes, we spoke about the fact that most people couldn't, even British people couldn't afford the £7,000 to £8,000. And that's why you have so many international students versus British students in classes now.
So, Emily has just tweeted at us, we need to be engaging with students younger than undergraduate and A-level to increase diversity. I actually posted that we were doing this debate today on the Museum as Muck group, which is a closed group that you can join. And that was their resounding response as well, how to increase the diversity in the sector. You need to talk to people when they're young. They have no idea they can even aspire to be one of us. Now that's the thing, we need to go into schools, we need to talk to people, we need to be visible, we need to tell them that you too can don your purple nitrile gloves one day and touch things, and that's fine. You need to get out there and talk to them, because you need to sow the seeds that this is a dream, this is the coolest job ever, because it is. But you need to get out there and talk to them, and that's a good start.
Doing one first degree is much more sort of plausible for people than doing a master's and then another, or working for a period of time, because there were a number of people in our course. But I say a number, I think maybe that number was just one person on the course that we studied in Cardiff that had to work at the weekend, and they were working not just at the weekend but also evenings and whenever they could, basically, to support themselves. And that person was living at home as well, so it can be done as a postgrad.
I would like to chime in though, that's only an option if you're very well. Because something that I would love to cover is disability, and I would like to cover mental health, even if it's just these words. So it might not be feasible to work every evening of the week on top of a full-time conservation degree and your weekends. I mean, that takes stamina from a person who is 100% well. We cannot demand that of, a disabled student, for example, and the fact that that's what it takes is a very difficult one that I think we should look at. Someone did actually ask us. Oh yes, no, go on. Sorry.
But I know that there's definitely a movement in museums towards not allowing unpaid volunteer work, so that you only allow people that have something, or it's part of their course, to do this work. But I think there's also been less and less paid work available for students to do during the holidays as well. I know that when I first started working in England in the early 2000s, and in the Heritage we had students every summer in to do work, and that just isn't there anymore. So that was how people made their way through the courses, to do work over the summer and money doing work. It was like experience and work at the same time, but that seems to be lacking to a great extent within the profession, which is to do with conservation budgets and all that sort of thing as well. But at least if when you're training, that you can get experience and make some money at the same time in those long holidays, it'd be great if we could support that a bit more.
Yes, absolutely agree.
And I think the competitive nature of the profession is something that we all talk about, and we all say, oh, isn't that a problem? But it becomes very obvious if you're, particularly if we're talking about conservators that come into the profession through apprenticeships. It'd be really interesting to see the number of conservation employers that do consider people without degrees in their recruitment process. Are they just sifted out at the start, or do they get the opportunity to interview as well? So I think that's, if anyone has any comments on that, that would be really interesting at this point. And otherwise, I think we do have a comment at the back. Oh.
Does it work?
Oh, it does.
Hello? Okay. I was just going to say, I completely agree with what you're saying about apprenticeships, because if you're talking about people who are university students, etc., if they can't fund a placement or whatever, if you start as an apprentice, you're going to be a level ahead anyway. I'm in a position where I'm employing people, and one of my biggest problems is finding young people who actually have the skills or experience. People coming out straight out of university are a minefield. So, you're looking for either someone who's extremely exceptional, somebody who's been on a great placement, etc. So if you can do that through some sort of apprenticeship right from the beginning, I don't personally really see what the point in having a degree is when you can't actually be university do it.
I think I noticed, I went to an interview which was for an apprenticeship, and I thought, well, I'm overqualified for this, I've got an MA, but when I went to the interview, it was a group interview, the people being interviewed were mid-career, 5 of us had, I think, degrees, and I was actually really surprised to not see any school leavers at all in that room, and that just really kind of threw it back to me that jobs are hard to find and people will go for things which are below their qualification level just because they have to. So that's another thing that needs addressing. It's how do we make sure that apprenticeships are sort of for school leavers. Also, I know it's great that people from all careers are applying to do apprenticeships because that's diversity, but apprenticeships are designed for school leavers and it should be the route away from academia if you don't want to go to university. So it's like this imbalance, it's almost like knocking heads with two ideas, but that's just one experience I've had of it.
I think at the moment with the university fees rising so much, it's a very plausible route to take. So is it actually being targeted at people in schools?
I don't know whether people in school know about this, specifically with conservation. Yeah. Because I know that when I was at school, I didn't know what conservation was. I thought it was wildlife, pandas, all that sort of thing. So it came to me as a surprise, yeah. But I don't think they know, and I think if they did know, they'd be very excited about it. So.
But doesn't this then go back to what Jenny was saying about the fact that we as a profession need to be more present in schools so that people are made aware of the profession and of this particular route?
Well, sort of going back to that, I think if we're present in the schools, if we're considering the people who are in the profession and their financial status, if we consider that everybody who's going into this is going to take on a debt of what is it, like £40,000 now, surely we should be specifically promoting these apprenticeships rather than a course that potentially they're going to pay back with a wage, which is, as I said, so low.
Interesting.
I think then there's like a general trend towards opening up apprenticeships more now. I don't know when it started, but there's definitely an impetus to do it. So I think there needs to be a levelling out. You can go to university if you want to, but you can also take this route. I think many people feel that they have to go to university because it's so specialised. They feel like they need that background. So it's kind of getting there another way, like genuinely getting there another way. You've got I think there's a diagram Icon has of how people pursue a career in conservation. So the pathway, thank you. So one route is traditional university, the other is apprenticeships. But I question how accessible the apprenticeship route is at the minute.
I think it obviously needs to get government funding and recognition. But for instance, talking about government, I was in Foreign Office recently. They have posters on the wall saying, "This is so and so. She works for us. She came through an apprenticeship." You know, they're promoting it themselves for their own, so maybe this is something that really is very exciting.
That was a question I was going to ask as well. Oh, and we have another question. Thank you. If anyone, I feel like I'm out of the loop with how young adults are led towards apprenticeships. Are apprenticeships encouraged in schools, and if they are, can conservation sort of essentially get in on that if there are kind of career days? Is that something that conservation could be involved with? Because as we say, a lot of the discussion from particularly working class backgrounds and people with low income backgrounds is that it has to start early, because otherwise you've kind of set yourself on a different trajectory before you have the chance to then change careers, which is costly. I'm seeing pointing from in different directions. So who has a question? If you could raise your hand so I know. Oh, there's one over there. There's one over there. Did you have a question as well? I'm encouraging questions simply. So there's three.
Yeah, moving on from internships and low pay and conservation, I think that's an ongoing debate that will go forever. But what kind of... So the way I went to conservation was we were the Victorian Museum was doing work with communities, And so I already met people from museum world before I even got a museum job. How are you integrating into communities and as a wider thing? And also, as a second question is, how does the lack of diversity in conservation affect the work you do? That's like an open question. Mm-hmm. Do you have questions that you want to ask, or is there?
I think for the first question, what is it essentially? You mean what museums can be doing in communities to be present? Because I think it can be quite a barrier. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it depends. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. I think it depends on the institution, and it might be that more museums can do more with communities. I'm associated with the People's History Museum, which we don't tend to say our employer as the C word, but whoops. And they do a lot with community curating on different subjects with different groups of people, and I think in that kind of context where the working with communities and being present as an institution, as a positive institution for communication is set into the programme of the museum, I feel that's a very, very positive way of challenging diversity in the heritage sector in general, as well as being a voice for different groups of people that don't have a voice generally. What was the second part of your question? Sorry. Yes, I remember. Sorry. What does the lack of diversity do to? Does anyone have any comments? I feel like I want to say the phrase "nothing about us without us," and that basically is a famous phrase that sums up: if you've not got people representing themselves, then an institution or a community or a profession won't study or won't do any work about that. I'm looking at Nerys as I imagine you have something to say, but does anyone have anything to say in response to that?
I think just generally that it's going to, if we're quite homogenous as a profession, then that's going to, we're at risk of groupthink, of always approaching conservation problems in the same way. As conservators, we're all very aware of the kind of values that we bring to our work and also our understanding of the context and significance of the objects that we work with. And I think that those understandings would be quite different if we came from different backgrounds. And I think it would be good to get quite different perspectives in some cases on conservation practice, and I really think it would potentially bring different perspectives as well. And I think the only reason that might not be obvious is because we are all relatively similar in the first place, and it can be difficult to see what you're not seeing. I think also sorry, I've just completely forgotten what I was going to say.
We have two other questions from the room, if that's a good opportunity.
We have one more question from the room, if anyone still has one.
You can fight it out, I know there's two.
It was me.
Okay. Hiya.
It was probably less a question, more just a clarification, because we were talking about apprenticeships before, and the opportunities to increase diversity. I suppose the point of facts for conservation, you aren't apprenticeships yet. There are other apprenticeships in allied areas that are not directly within conservation.
Right.
And as for the second point, so working with the employer group, there is demand from some employers to use apprenticeships directly to help support diversity, but they're probably few and far between anything else. But there is a potential there if you want to use them properly when they are there.
Is there a vested interest in the cost or the lower cost of employing an apprentice as opposed to employing an employee, do you think?
I mean, the apprenticeship minimum wage is £3.51 an hour, but
it's an ice cream.
very few people actually pay that rate, so most large employers have to are committed to paying minimum wage or run the minimum wage here anyway. So apprentices would still fall in that same category. So I don't think it's a race to the bottom necessarily.
Okay.
I think also with apprenticeships, obviously, if you're to have high quality apprenticeships, then the employer is going to be putting more than just money in. They're going to be investing their time in training the apprentice and giving them a high quality education as well. Otherwise, there's no point in it as well. And I think this is possibly going to become part of a wider debate about who has the responsibility for training conservators. Is it up to individuals to go off to university and pay £9,000 a year to get themselves trained so that they can then sell themselves as conservators? Or should employers be taking on more of this cost and creating more apprenticeships and paid internships and taking some of that financial burden themselves, taking it away from the individuals?
And whether there's like an end point, if you do an apprenticeship, are you going to have a job with the company afterwards, or is it just a means to move on, give you that experience to then roll with your career in another company, another way? So it's...
As soon as you've done that either way, you're far more desirable to an employer. So when you carry on with the journey, you're more likely to also get someone a job than somebody who hasn't had that experience. Experience
seems to be key. That's what I keep getting thrown at me. So
but you might have seen the phrase "career black hole" popping up. I'm not sure where we are with the screen size. Are people with apprenticeships going to be employed to the same level? And does this go back to what Nerys was saying earlier about a whole profession change that we are responsible for making?
But then, so maybe it is actually up to us. So maybe we are the change. Like, so when we get to we recruit people who came in as apprentices. We make the choice to recruit someone who's disabled and might just need that little bit of flexibility in the workplace. Maybe that is us. Maybe when we get that position of power, we make the changes.
Maybe. And there's a hand raised.
It was just another point about the Conservator apprenticeship and the world included for a degree. So for an existing MA program, so people will come out with 4 or 5 years experience plus exactly the same MA. So it's not a point of academic versus apprentice. Actually, the apprentice will have 4 or 5 years experience plus the MA and 0 debts. So there's an opportunity to get at university. It's a very strong model. In fact, so we had a debate earlier this year with lots of conservation employers and supervising building standards. And it could in ways it ticks lots of boxes and has lots of potential, with a big caveat that it's not actually relevant.
I would probably like to just bring us back to 2 final questions that we were asked. Just so we can wrap up and everyone can have some wine. One question sent by Ali was, what people of colour voices can we lift up, and how can we help people of colour flourish in a predominantly white field, which is kind of a huge thing. And it doesn't just extend to people of colour, of course, it extends to all diversity groups. And that's one that I think we need ICON to help us with, and just celebrate those stories, and just make sure that people know that they are welcome into this profession from all walks of life.
I would second that 100 times. Basically, from be it from the LGBTQ, from disabilities, from race, from class. You need, basically we all need to be jumping into these communities and talking directly with them, not at them. We don't want tokens, we don't want to have, we've got this one person, whatever. You have to invest in the communities to get them to come to you. And so that's, they have to be able to see themselves represented, or they have to be able to see the dream, or when you're thinking, oh yes, I'd like to be a fireman when you're 6 years old. They need to be able to do that in conservation, and they can't do that if they're not seeing themselves represented. So I hope that answers that.
I feel like that's the best summing up that we could have.
A really nice one to end on, actually. It in which case, thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your questions, your comments. Please continue to tweet, to talk to us. Talk as a sector, talk in your lunchrooms, talk everywhere about this. Let's get this sorted, people.
And if you have anything particularly interesting to talk about that you'd like to talk about on our podcast, then get in touch, because we're always keen to have new interviews.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. So we have to everyone on Twitter as well? Or just me? Okay.
I really I have a long list of things I wanted to say to you tonight. We don't have time because I really want you to be able to meet all these fabulous people and them to meet you. But what I would like to say is thank you for your honesty. It's incredibly powerful. Thank you all. Thank you for calling ICON on this and asking us to take this seriously and for us to get out there and, all of us do something, as he said. Everybody get out there and talk about conservation with people that matter and talk about conservation with the people that matter. That's all I want to say, except that I want to give a huge thank you to Jenny Mathiasson, Kloe Rumsey, Christina Rozeik, Rebecca Plumbe, and Nerys Rudder. Thank you so much. And Fox, the great Fox. Thank you.
And we should say as well, thank you very much, Alison, for inviting this and encouraging this, and ICON generally for having us. It's been really great. Thank you very much. And for everyone for listening.
Now go drink wine. Come on. Thank you. Special thanks to Nerys Rudder and Rebecca Plumbe for being part of the panel, to everyone at ICON for having us, to our sound engineer Fox for making it all possible, and of course everyone who joined in the conversation via Twitter and Facebook on the day. If you'd like the conversation to continue, remember that you can tweet us at the Seaward Podcast, email us on theseawardpodcast@gmail.com, follow us on Facebook, or just visit the website at theseaward.show. This has been a Wooden Dice production.